Welcome to the Big Change the Film interview series, and my name is Jason Cohen. I personally have lost over 120 pounds, and every week I chat with inspiring individuals who've also lost significant amounts of weight, hear their stories, and pass along some of that inspiration to others. Including today's guest and myself, the total pounds lost is now up to 11,367 pounds. This week's guest is Ben Rayland, who lives in Syracuse, New York. Ben's a full-time strength coach who's lost almost 90 pounds in the last several years. Not long ago, Ben says that his eating was absolutely terrible. He would sometimes down an entire bag of Doritos in one sitting. He'd eat entire pizzas, entire cheesecakes, and during a single day, he would eat on upwards of 8,000 calories. Ben had a bit of a wake-up call after going to the doctor, getting some bad blood work, and he told me that he couldn't believe that he himself was so unhealthy when he had dedicated his entire life to the health of others. He decided to change his diet. He's now stronger and he's healthier than ever. We talk about what it's like being a plant-based powerlifter, coaching others, what it's like raising 4 boys in a plant-based household, and so much more. He has a wonderful story, and thanks so much for tuning in this week. The Big Change the Film podcast and interview series is sponsored by Health IQ, which is an insurance company that helps health-conscious people like runners, cyclists, weightlifters, vegetarians, and vegans get lower rates on their life insurance. I was intrigued when they first reached out to me and shared the company's values and mission. My contact, Tim, even told me about how the company cares for the well-being of its own employees by providing a gym to work out in at lunch, healthy eating options, and much, much more. Health IQ can save health-conscious people up to 33% because physically active people have a 56% lower risk of heart disease, 20% lower risk of cancer, and a 58% lower risk of diabetes compared to people who are inactive. 56% of Health IQ customers save between 4 and 33%. They have special rates for those who live an active life, and you can get additional savings by submitting your data through apps like Strava or Runkeeper. Health IQ is the official life insurance partner of USA Weightlifting, Roadrunners Club of America, USA Triathlon, and many more. Go to healthiq.com/BCTF to learn more. Again, that's healthiq.com/BCTF, as in Big Change the Film, to learn more, to help support the show, and to see if you qualify. I appreciate what they're doing with their sponsorship, and 100% of it is going towards the production of this project. Thanks again, Health IQ, for the support. I'm here with Ben Rayland. I saw his story on Forks Over Knives, and he's got a fantastic story. He's lost some weight in the process. And so, Ben, first off, thanks. Maybe we could just start off with a little bit about yourself and where you're from.
Yeah. I live in Syracuse, New York. I was born and raised in the 315 area code. I grew up in a small town east of Syracuse called Rome. And my dad was stationed at the air base there when I was a young boy. And I sort of really loved the area. And even though we moved around a little bit, I always wanted to come back and sort of settle here. My wife is also from the area, so I know it's a little antiquated, but I've always sort of felt this very strong sense of community. I volunteer a lot and work with children, and I like to give back because I grew up here and consider this my home. But I have 4 sons. I'm a full-time strength coach, so I work with athletes ranging from the ages of 5. I even do some preschool work all the way up to elite athletes. I train some collegiate and professional athletes. I prefer working with some of the younger age groups, but my sort of bailiwick spans all the way up there. And I'm also the children's ministry director at my church here in Syracuse, the DeWitt Community Church. So
you got a full plate.
Yeah, a lot going on.
And then, we're talking in part because you've lost some weight. So how much weight have you lost in total?
It's about 90 pounds, just shy of 90 pounds. Okay. So at my heaviest, I was 252 pounds, and I currently weigh about 165. I fluctuate between 160 and 170, depending on how the wind's blowing that day, So.
Yeah, I hear that for sure. So, you've lost some weight. I know that fitness is a part of your life. It's a part of your work. It's part of your, and it sounds like it had been for a long time. But, take me back to childhood. I know you're from that area. Were you overweight as a kid? Were you bigger? Were you smaller?
Not really. And that's the interesting part. Growing up, my family was always really into fitness. And years ago, I had actually written an article. I used to do some freelance writing, and I wrote an article for this sort of magazine, this little pamphlet called the Energy Times. And it was about family fitness, getting the whole family involved in fitness together and doing activities that were calisthenic based so that you didn't disclude anybody from getting involved in the family workout time. But my family was really into that. My dad was into biking. He had a Concept 2 rower in the basement, so we used to row a lot and things like that. So when I was growing up, I was always really into fitness. But what happened is, as so many young men in our country, I think, get swept into, when I was in high school, I got swept into this sort of bodybuilding craze, right? Where I was onto the supplements. I was in the gym every day weightlifting. I was doing a lot of that kind of thing to get bigger for football. And unfortunately, what goes along with that is a lot of unhealthy eating habits. You know, you get the 6 eggs a day that you're eating. You're taking all sorts of protein shakes and supplements. So even though I was more muscular then, you have a lot of the unnecessary or unwanted weight that comes along with that.
And then, you know, my guess is if that's kind of your track, a lot of that's desired. Like, it's not seen as a negative thing. Is that right?
Yeah, it's not at all, right? And so that's why in my forks over knives story, what's interesting in my case in particular is I was rolling along, right? I thought I was fine. I'm like, man, I go to the gym every day. You know, I'm this powerlifting dude. I've got all these state records. I think I'm in great shape. And, you know, my doctor, who's a family friend, she was just very blunt with me. And she said, you know, because you're creating this demand for calories, you're eating all the wrong foods. And it shows here in your profile. You know, you're not healthy. You're not eating the right foods. You got to start to make a change, or we're going to have to start getting you on some meds here. And, you know, we're going to have to look at some other alternatives.
Wow. And then, you know, and I know it might sound foreign or sound like a silly question, but was there ever a thought in that process before that moment where, like, maybe I need to lose a little bit of weight, or, you know, like maybe I should be a little smaller? Was that even ever a consideration?
It was a little bit. There were times where I would creep up and get heavier. I think at my peak, I was 252, and that was the highest I had ever gotten. And there were definitely periods where it would fluctuate, where, excuse me, it seemed like the times in my life that I would get up that high, it would be the times where I was more sedentary. I would have a sedentary job where I was sitting at a desk a little bit more. I wasn't, you know, sort of doing as much cardiovascular work as I needed to. So what would happen was every so often I would sort of, you know, like most Americans, I would make a resolution or get my butt in gear and I drop like 20 or 30 pounds, but I would always hover at about like 220 or so. You know, sort of a muscular but overweight 220.
Yeah. And you know, I'm definitely, the world is not mine as far as, you know, weightlifting, powerlifting, all that kind of stuff. But my feeling is a lot of the indication that you're going for as far as, you know, how you're progressing and whatnot really just comes down to the numbers that you're putting up. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. And so you're divided up into weight classes when you compete in powerlifting, but a lot of guys will drop weight to come down to a weight class. So for instance, when I would hover at like 220, I would compete very often at 198. So you know, I'd literally 3 weeks out from the competition, I would come down 15, 20, 25 pounds from the weight where I was, you know, by dropping water weight or just doing some strict dieting. And a lot of times then you retain that strength and that bulk. You see it a lot in the bodybuilding world. You get these heavyweight, you know, bodybuilders that their walk around weight in the off season is like 305, 310 pounds, because you get a lot of muscle weight, muscle gain that comes along with that fat weight. Then when you strip the fat off, you're going to lose a little bit of muscle too, but you retain a lot of that muscle that you gained as you gained all that weight in the first place, if that makes sense.
Wow. Yeah. So, and then, you know, were you married at the time that you got the news from your doctor?
Yes, yes. So I was married, and at the time I had 3 children. I had 2 children at that point. Yes, I always swore I'd never be that dad, but it's hard to remember all the dates. I had 2 children at that point.
And then what were those, you know, I'm thinking, you know, and you said it, you know, as far as your blood work, I think to quote you, you said, I was floored. My whole life I've been dedicated to fitness. Now my blood work was telling me that I was in no better shape than most of the people I'd spent my life trying to help. What were those initial internal conversations that you started having yourself like?
Well, especially, I believe at the time my wife was pregnant. And so we had already had two sons and we were expecting our third. And I was just thinking about my longevity at that point. I think what happens as Americans is that, we have this win at all cost mentality, right? Where a lot of people, when they think of getting back in shape, it's got to be tied to competition in some way, right? Like, let's power lift, or a lot of people you'll see they'll want to run a marathon or a half marathon. And I think what I noticed with myself, and I was trying to be as self-aware and honest as I could, was you see this with a lot of people. They might be fit, but not healthy, right? And I think that's a big distinction to make. There's a big difference there. You can be fit, but not necessarily healthy. And I'll run boot camps at some local gyms and stuff. And you'll get these guys that come in and they're former athletes. They may have played lacrosse in college. They're in great shape. Like they're actually pretty fit, but they're not healthy. They probably drink too much. Their cholesterol numbers are high. They might be on blood pressure meds. And I think that's what I sort of had to be honest with myself about is, hey, looking at my own personal longevity here, what changes can I make to get myself healthy and not necessarily fit?
And then what were those conversations? I'm thinking you're 2 or 3, you're a couple kids in, you're, a bit into marriage. What were those conversations like with your wife?
She was a vegetarian at the time and had sort of always been concerned about my snacking habits and, had been kind of, trying to inch me toward, a more plant-based diet and eating more healthy foods like her. She would always try. She would put vegetables on my plate or, she'd say, hey, let's make this stir fry tonight and let's eat that and we'll have you try it. But I was just very close-minded, like a lot of dudes in our society. I mean, people in general, but especially a lot of guys. We used to go to family dinners and make fun of my wife for being vegan, and we would talk about sort of what a pain in the butt it was that we always had to make special food for her and everything like that. So she would try and I would sort of, sometimes I'd listen and I'd sort of try these foods. But one of the things I got to tell you in that regard to answer that question on a very personal level, when people ask me, I owe a lot of this to my wife. My wife has never been anything but supportive, and she was the type of vegan that you want to meet, right? And I mean that in a way where, how some vegans are out there spray painting people with fur coats and acting like lunatics, and they're doing all this crazy stuff, tying themselves to trees and everything like that. My wife is the type of vegan that if you're not vegan, you'd want to meet. She's very understanding and very open-minded and very patient. And, she just sort of waited for me to come around. Rich Roll talks about that idea in his book, right? You can stand in the light and you can set an example, but you can't make somebody change. That internalization, that change has to come from within, right? If you're not ready to change and you're not ready to take that next step, nobody can force you to go there. That's only going to come inside, right? So my wife did a very good job of that. She did a very good job of just sort of standing in the light, leading by example, leading a healthy lifestyle in regards to her diet. And it just took me a while, but I ended up following suit.
Yeah, and then give me an idea. You mentioned about your wife being concerned about your snacking. Like what was your eating? How bad had things gotten before you got the news?
I'm going to be really honest with you. Part of my business as a trainer and a strength coach, I like to show people that article and tell them, hey man, I'm exactly like you, right? I'm not that different than you. And I'll even tell them to this very day, I'm not that different. I'm just like everybody else. Sometimes I'll get hungry and I'll eat a whole quart of ice cream, right? And we'll be watching football or something, and I'll have a whole quart of ice cream. I struggle with the same temptations that most people do, but excuse me, at its peak, the snacking was bad. I used to take out bags of Doritos at a time. There was times that I'd eat a whole sheet pizza all by myself, just because, with all the lifting and all the exercise, my demand for calories was so high. I mean, we're talking like 5,000 to 8,000 calories a day in some cases because I'd be lifting all the time and I'd be so heavy. When your body weight is that high, you need more calories. But it wasn't uncommon for me to take out a whole cheesecake, a whole bag of Doritos. My wife used to tease me because I'd run to the local grocery store and I used to buy those those bags of candy, bulk candy at the grocery store. And so she used to tease me how we had a budget built into our family budget for my candy snacking at night, because I used to love those little nougat candies, that had the jelly. It was like the white taffy that has the jelly in it. And I used to eat those nougat candies all the time. So she used to tease me about that.
So I guess looking back now, it's probably, no offense, but it's not the biggest wonder in the world that your numbers were what they were.
No, not at all. Not at all.
And then, when your doctor gave you that news, was her, did she have an ultimatum for you? Did she say, hey, you got to go on meds? If not, and then what were you looking at having to kind of manage?
Well, she had sort of said, we're going to keep an eye on it because the cholesterol numbers are a little fine. At that point, my blood pressure was all right. But she had sort of set me up with a consultation with one of the nurses in the office, and just sort of went over the very traditional like food pyramid eating options, right? That most Americans would think that they're taught in school with the food pyramid, right? So you're talking your servings of meat and dairy every day, your servings of bread, right? We talked about that, but I had just sort of said, okay, I don't want to go on meds. I don't want to, that's the last thing I want to do. I'm too young to do that. I think at the time I was 32. So I just sort of said, I had been able to sort of really buckle down and get in better shape and lose some weight when I wanted to in the past. I had some periods where I had the capability of doing that. And so I just sort of said, hey, before we go down that road, let me try to see if I can make some changes myself here and sort of, get on the right path.
And then what did those first days, weeks, I'm thinking you're going from however many nougat, things a night, and then now you've got to make some changes, and then here we are almost 90 pounds later. So, what did those first couple of days and weeks, what did they look like for you?
Oh my goodness, man. Even you saying the nougats, I miss those things, man. I don't get to eat them anymore. I used to love those. No, it's okay. It's okay. But what's interesting about the Forks Over Knives article was because they obviously run a website where it's plant-based and they're trying to focus on that. My original article was much longer than what they published. I just wanted to give them more content than necessary and sort of let them chop it down. But initially, my journey was very, very small steps. Remember HBO had did that documentary a couple of years ago where it was like a 4-part sort of mini series on, dietary, problems and concerns in America. Gosh, I'm blanking on what exactly it's called now, but in the movie, they talk about how little changes, very small changes that are very ordinary and don't seem like very much at the time, add up to extraordinary changes as time elapses, right? So at first, the machine, the needle, if you will, moved very slowly. I just started drinking more water, right? And drinking less alcohol, right? So, for a while, I had given up alcohol completely. And then about like a few months in, I was like, man, it's been several months since I haven't had a drink, and I've lost like 20 pounds just from not drinking. Maybe I'm not going to drink very much anymore, but I started drinking more water. A really big one for me, and that, these guys made this wonderful movie and it sort of slipped through the cracks, was King Corn. I don't know if you've ever heard that.
I've heard of
heard of that movie. Yeah, these two like college dudes went and got their hair tested and found out that there was like nitrogen levels in their hair. They had elevated nitrogen in their hair samples, and they went on this mission to figure out why. So they bought an acre of corn in Iowa and followed the corn through the whole process in our country. And it's free on YouTube. Anybody can watch this documentary. And I got to give those guys props, because that was one of the first things that I saw where I said, geez, corn is sort of filthy right now in our country. High fructose corn syrup, these corn products, they're making us sick. And at one point in the movie, there was one of these farmers that was putting the herbicides on this corn in their acre that they had purchased, and he had a hazmat suit on. And I'll never forget, I'm watching this movie and I'm like, I'm eating this, right? All these Doritos and all these nougats and all these things that I'm getting that have this high fructose corn syrup in them. I'm eating this food and it's making me sick, right? That's what originally led me to the meat connection. because I sort of said, geez, a lot of the feed that these cattle in our country are eating is this high fructose corn syrup, is this corn that has all these pesticides and herbicides in it that's making us sick. So a big, big, big step for me that happened even before any of the plant-based steps or the veganism was not eating high fructose corn syrup. Because if you think about it, that's a very manageable step. That's something that's challenging, but most people, if they're pretty diligent, can do. It's not that hard to read a label and see that something's got high fructose corn syrup in it and just get an alternative that might be a little bit healthier that doesn't have that ingredient. So those first steps were very small. Just drinking more water, less alcohol, less high fructose corn syrup. And then as the weight started falling off and I started feeling better and getting more healthier, that's when some of the bigger changes started taking place.
Wow. And then, what did you begin to eat and what did you begin to do? I know your wife had been a vegetarian for a long time. Did you start to significantly change your vegetable intake? Also, I'm curious because I know for a lot of people, myself as well, I was super closed off to a lot of things. So did your palate begin to develop as you're drinking less alcohol, you're eating less Doritos, what did that development to eating more plants look like?
It was interesting, and that's where the article sort of picks up. I watched Forks Over Knives with my wife, and we, even though to not be controversial, we didn't post this in the Forks Over Knives article. But what really got me about Forks Over Knives was Dr. Campbell's work with rats, where he had the protein, the phosphoprotein casein, and he was able to literally turn sickness and cancer on and off in these rats. I know that animal testing is very controversial, so we just didn't want to sort of put that in the article. But that's what really struck me. I'm like, so here you got this dude. He literally made these rats sick. Then he made them better. Then he made them sick again, and he turned it on and off several times. And so I'm thinking, man, if this guy can do this for these rats, then why wouldn't that work for me, right? This guy's done it. Like, there's all the information right there. This guy's done it, and he's done these, these field studies. So when I started doing it, what I had read, I did a lot of research going into it because I knew that it would be hard, and I knew that it would be sort of hard and slow going to wean myself off of all those foods. Cheese and ice cream, pizza and ice cream were definitely the hardest. Those were the last ones that I gave up. I stayed at about 90% plant-based for a very long time. And then slowly, I think you're making a really good point as the palate developed. As you're getting used to some of those cheese alternatives, to some of those meat alternatives, a lot of times when people ask me about it, I said, just don't go cold turkey. It's too hard. Because even the fact that your body, you're sort of detoxifying. You're literally in detox. Your body is bleeding and sweating out some of those toxins and poisons that it's habitually been used to its whole life. And it's a very stark and hard change for your body to go through to let go of some of those things right away. So it was very, very slow. And, I never thought about it that way. But given your words, using your words, that, the palate did sort of develop a little bit as I started eating more plant-based foods and less meat. I started craving those types of foods. I think my microbiome started changing a little bit, where those sort of foods tasted a little bit better to me. And it sort of slowly moved the needle.
Yeah, and you touched on a good point there that cheese, pizza, ice cream, that kind of stuff was kind of the last. Dairy seems like it just has a foothold for so many people. What was it about those things specifically that were just really difficult for you?
Just the taste, right? And see, here's the deal. My wife and I sort of tease each other and go back and forth about this. I always try to be the honest vegan, the honest one, right? There are a lot of people that are so dedicated to the plant-based cause. I don't think they're real with people, right? I miss pizza, man, right? I really miss it a lot. Pizza and ice cream taste good, right? And I tell people that. I'm like, listen, it's a sacrifice that I'm going through because I know it makes me healthier in the long run. And now, to be quite frank with you, I do it just to prove a point. right? I do it to prove to people that, hey, I can be a really healthy strength coach. I can be a power lifter without having to eat those types of foods. But I really think that's what it is. They've done all that research into, dairy especially lights up those neurotransmitters in your brain, those pleasure centers. And I mean, they've associated it with hardcore drugs like crack and cocaine. The pleasure receptors in your brain that light up when you eat those types of foods are very similar to the reaction that you get from addictive narcotic drugs. And so what happens is you get lit up when you eat those foods. They taste really good. So even now, again, trying to be the honest person, my wife makes this delicious cashew-based mac and cheese, right? It's this nut-based mac and cheese. And it's great, right? Don't get me wrong, it's delicious. But she used to make this version with cheese that had like cheddar sprinkled all over the top of it. And I'm not going to lie, I miss that version, right? That version does taste better. And I think for most people, that's the hardest step to make, to give up that dairy. You'll even see a lot of people can go without meat. A lot of people will be able to scale back on the meat. But taking that dairy for me, and I think a lot of people that I've counseled and worked with, that's the hardest final step, is giving up the milk and the cheese.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It was, kind of in some ways the last one for me as well. It's so many people that I talk to. And it's, you kind of alluded to it. It's designed to be desirable. It's designed to almost be, where you can't stop eating it. You purposefully overeat. You crave it. I was joking with a friend. I purposely on my runs now will run by some of those places just to make myself kind of like remember and smell it, and also to remember that like yes, it tastes good, but it's not worth it. At the end of the day, and whether that's just from strictly a caloric standpoint of putting down a 2,000 calorie cheese pizza in no time at all, or the actual long-term effects on health. What about this journey has surprised you? You were a fit guy. You were, involved in the health and fitness industry, and yet you sit on a completely different end of the spectrum than you were before. So, what has surprised you about this journey?
Before I forget, Weight of the Nation is what that movie was called on HBO. That little mini series, because that's got some really helpful tips in it and everything, but. What's really sort of surprised me the most, and what's interesting about when we were talking, initially, was James Cameron and the work that he's done. If you look at some of the things that he's written, he sort of takes a different take on it from a health perspective overall. I think because the buzzwords are the how much weight you've lost and the how much how fit people are. Those are the stories that have the hook and grab people's attention. We all want to see those stories. Everybody likes Rich Roll's story because the dude's like a maniac now. He's running all these ultra races, everything like that. But Jim Cameron's always come from a point of view of, I feel so much better, right? I feel so good on a day in, day out basis. I'm going to tell you, without exaggerating, with no hyperbole taking place here, I have not been sick in like a decade. I was always a pretty healthy dude to begin with, but, like most people, I'd have a little infection here or there. I'd go see the doctor. I'd have to get some Zithromax, if I got some bronchitis or anything like that. The moment I became vegan, that health level just rose to a different place, where if I get sick now, I'm still at like 80, 85%. I don't miss work. I don't miss workouts. I very, very rarely have a bad day, because when you bleed those toxins out of your system, your body has the time and the energy and the focus to fight off those infections that it should be fighting off. So last year, I actually, it's a nutty story. I banged my head on something at the gym, and I got a staph infection because this thing hit my head, and I got a little cut in my head that got infected. But because of the staph infection, I got shingles, actually. And so the chicken pox sort of came back up on me because I had this weakened immune system, and I got the shingles at the very young age of 37. But that was the first time that I had been sick, that I had actually had to go to the doctor for any reason other than a checkup in like a decade, right? And that's what's been the most astounding thing to me. I don't get sick. I don't get hurt. right? When I do get hurt, if I do twist an ankle coaching the kids, I recover a lot more quickly than I did when I was a meat eater and my body was spending a lot of its energy fighting off the toxins I was taking in from that food.
And then, you know, I know you're obviously in the gym all the time, and you know, there is a certain narrative that, you know, you if you're a man, you eat meat, you got to get your protein, you know. So how do you kind of navigate that now, being a plant-based athlete and, you know, still being super passionate about, you know, weightlifting, strength coaching, all that kind of stuff?
It's tough. It's tough. I take a lot of flack. I take a lot of flack in my own family, like my dad, my father-in-law, my brother-in-law. They'll all make comments and tease. You know, in the strength coaching world especially, I take a lot of flack because I'm not a big dude. You know, I'm about 5'10", 160, 165. And when I go to these strength coaching conferences and I see other strength coaches, I take a lot of flack for not being a large guy. You know, and that was one of the reasons that I did always lift so much. And I always tried to be so big because, you know, let's be frank, in our society, bigger people command respect, right? You know, if you and I go to a bar and there's some dude in there that's like 6'2", 240, right? We're immediately going to make assumptions about that guy because he's bigger and he just looks stronger than we do, right? So never mind the fact that when I go to these conferences, most people don't know, you know, that I can knock some heads in powerlifting and I might be stronger than a lot of these dudes that are bigger than me, right? But you don't look the part. So it is tough, especially in my industry, sort of being the vegan. But now that the ship is starting to turn a little bit and you've got a lot of these, you know, more famous and bigger athletes coming out as vegan now, like there's some NFL players that are vegan, all this other stuff. I think it's sort of giving some credence to the cause where a lot of people are saying, hey, I can do that too. I can be vegan and I can not eat meat and dairy and I can still get the calories I need to sort of do that, you know. And to be completely real with you and you know, all your followers and everything, that's actually what made me take my final step. I was very content sort of being like a 90-10 type of person, you know, eating healthy and eating plant-based for the most part, but every once in a while I'd snack on some meat or some dairy. But my wife actually said it would mean so much to our cause if you were vegan, right? Like if people could see you and see you out there winning these powerlifting competitions and like, you know, cracking skulls at these competitions and lifting more than other people. She's like, it would mean so much to the plant-based movement if you were a vegan. So it was really because of her that I wrote that article for Forks Over Knives, because I wanted to to sort of dispel a lot of the mythology, because I'm the one sort of rebuttal that people don't have an answer for. Right? People say, oh, you can't get enough protein. You can't be healthy. You'll be weak and spindly. Really? How about I take off my shirt and you take off your shirt and you tell me how you think I'm doing, how you think that's working out for me? Because there are a lot of dudes that are vegan and jacked and they seem to be doing just fine, you know? So.
Yeah, and I think I was reading that that you've had similar results, you know, because obviously, you know, numbers that you're lifting are kind of the standard or the measurement. I think I was reading that you're right around the same as you were as far as what you were lifting previously, but at a lower weight. Is that right?
Yeah. So when you compete in powerlifting, they have this number called the Wilkes score, where it's to even out the competition and even out the playing field. It's this formula that they use to compare you to people of different body weights. So my deadlift weight at my body weight is used to sort of compare me to somebody that's in the 275-pound weight class, right? So let's say this big 275-pound dude is deadlifting 600 pounds, but me at 165 is only lifting, you know, as I'm lifting like, 530, I should be given credit for that, right? Because I'm lifting a higher percentage. My Wilkes score has actually gone up since I've lost the weight, since I've become vegan. When I used to compete at like the 198, 220 weight class, my deadlift was in like the high 500 range, right? I was creeping in on maybe getting a 600-pound deadlift. But right now I've retained a great deal of that strength and lost about 40, 50 pounds of body weight from where I used to compete. And so my numbers have actually gotten better. My numbers have gone up since becoming vegan.
Wow. And then, you know, one thing people might be curious about is, what are you doing in terms of, do you do any kind of powders or any kind of supplements or anything? And then are you having to adjust, to eating more than maybe the average plant-based vegan athlete would, or just person?
So that's one thing that I'm glad you asked about, because I take no supplements of any kind, right? And I've always sort of taken a very strong stance on that. I think they're a waste of money. I actually met a nutritionist once who said, as Americans, we have the most expensive urine in the world because we eat these supplements, we take these supplements, and then we just end up, urinating them out as our kidneys filter through these things, But I don't take any supplements. I don't take a multivitamin. I actually get my vitamin B12 because, as plant-based folks, we got to worry about that. We get fortified nutritional yeast. So I get my vitamin B12 from the fortified nutritional yeast that we buy. So I figure I get it that way because you don't really need as much as they say you do anyway. But I don't take any supplements of any kind. And I always sort of try to tell that to the young athletes I coach. I can see if you're like LeBron James, right? If you're like a very elite athlete at that elite level, you're an Olympian that's trying to get that elite edge, then maybe there's that need for supplements and some of these extra things. But regular Joes like us, it's not really, necessary in a lot of cases. And it just ends up being a waste of money and something that your body treats as an excess that you urinate out anyway. That is the one thing, too. The second part of your question, being an honest vegan, I have to eat an awful lot because I'm not getting the 9 kilocalories a gram from all that fat in the food. Some days it feels like I'm constantly eating. People even tease me a lot. They're like, man, you eat a lot for a small dude, right? Because I'm always crushing food because with my job running around after the kids and doing the things like that and the weightlifting, my caloric intake is so high. You got to almost sort of be at double time because you're vegan, because you literally have to eat twice the calories in starch to make up for that one fat gram that you might be eating at the 9 calories. So that's why in the Forks Over Knives article, I mentioned the McDougall diet. I eat a ton of starch, lots of bananas, lots of potatoes. So I'll bike into work a lot of days. And then as soon as I get to work, I'll crush like 3 bananas. So people tease me. They say I'm like a gorilla, like pounding bananas, but I'll just suck down 3 bananas because I'll need the potassium, the energy to go run around after the kids. But that, I will admit, is a hard part. I can see why a lot of these NFL players and a lot of these power athletes, why that's been the slowest part to turn and change, because the caloric need is so high, the demands are so high. It's hard to meet those demands as a vegan or as a plant-based athlete because you're just not, it's just a numbers game. You're not getting the calories that you would be from that meat and dairy, from those foods.
Yeah. And then, just because I know you mentioned you were familiar, and not that I'm suggesting it for other people or for myself, but, you were taking in, 8,000 calories a day now. What does that look like now? If you had to take a stab at how many calories a day you're taking in?
I weigh a lot less, so it's about 3,000 to 5,000, sort of depending on how many classes I'm teaching that week or how much I'm doing. If I was more sedentary, the times that I'm not teaching and the energy levels aren't quite as high, it's more closer to the 3, somewhere between 2,900 and 3,500. But on those weeks where I'm coaching 5, 6 classes a day, like in this winter session now where, a lot of athletes are getting ready for their spring sports, so I'm really busy, I'd probably say it's between 5,000 and 6,000 on a day in, day out basis now.
And again, that's for somebody who's obviously burning it, not just somebody who's sitting around at an office desk all day, every day.
Yeah, exactly. And so what my wife and I always joke is as the week goes on, I start losing weight just because the caloric demands are so high because I'm on the floor teaching so much. And then that's actually why she makes the cashew mac and cheese on Thursday, because I think the whole dish has about 8,000 calories in it. And I usually eat about 3/4 of it all by myself because I need those calories at the end of the week. So usually on Thursday night for dinner, I'm crushing like 5,500, 6,000 calories just because I need that fuel.
Wow. Well, you're certainly in the you're on the higher end than most people I talk to as far as those needs. What has it been like transitioning, because you were already a father and you were eating, it sounds like a standard American diet plus, and then now, you know, you're obviously still a father, you have 4 kids. What's that transition been like, having kids in the house, you know, trying to convince kids to eat food? And, you know, I'm guessing you changed, you know, some of the things at least that they were eating as well.
Yeah, well, you know what's interesting? We never tried to force them to do anything. You know, with all of my son, all my sons have actually made the decision to be vegan, and it's actually pretty remarkable because we never put any pressure on them. You know, I just sort of told them. I told my wife, I don't want to be that guy that tells my son he can't have pizza at a birthday party when all the other kids are eating pizza and cake. So we let them make that decision for themselves. I said, hey, man, you can be like mommy and daddy, and you can be a vegan if you want to. You can do your own thing, and you can still eat meat if you want to do that too. There's no pressure. I'm not going to think any less of you. It's your life, you know, and these are your decisions to make. And they actually, my second son, who's 8 now, is very into animals. He's just always, he's wanted to be a veterinarian since he was really little, and he loves animals, and he loves going to, you know, farms. And you know, we go to the farm sanctuary out in Watkins Glen a lot, and he likes to see the animals. He sort of started leading the other children from the front because of his love for animals. And he wanted to sort of be a plant-based eater and be vegan because he didn't think it was right because of the, you know, the humane aspect of it, you know, of just not wanting to, you know, slaughter these animals that don't need to be slaughtered. And so one of the things I will say, though, is there are these little YouTube clips, these videos that this woman does called Bite-Sized Vegan, and they're made for little children. Right. She's very honest with the kids, but not brutally honest where they're watching any graphic videos or anything like the documentary Earthlings or anything like that. So it's not too graphic, but it's just serious enough where young kids can sort of get the gist of what's really going on here in the meat industry and what we're doing to these animals and the impact it's having on our planet and our environment and on our own personal health. And my sons love this woman's videos. They're always typing these videos in and watching these little bite-sized vegan videos. But it's been interesting being in the house because, you know, I always say you can't force it. You can't stuff it down people's throat. You got to lead by example. And that's all my wife and I have tried to do. We try to eat a healthy, balanced diet. We try to infuse a lot of plant-based options. And they just followed suit and done it because they wanted to.
Yeah, that sounds like a beautiful story. You know, it's amazing whenever I'm not a parent myself, but having observed enough friends and heard enough people tell stories, you know, whenever you try and throw it down people's throat, oftentimes it's the least effective way. But if they're able to kind of make their own decisions and see, you know, I'm sure seeing the example of you and seeing the difference it's made, and obviously the priority, you know, I know one of the things that kind of stuck out that you said is, you know, I made the transition and my goals have shifted from being fit to being healthy, and I can't help but imagine that they saw that.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, what would you say to somebody who's at the beginning of this journey, who's trying to, you know, who's trying to make a transition, who's trying to get healthy, trying to navigate their way through? What would your advice be to that person on day one?
I always try to footnote people, like with the bite-sized vegan woman, and and give credit to the other people that have sort of said it better than we do, right? I sort of get a lot of influence and a lot of knowledge from a lot of the things I read. But Dan Buettner, I think is the way he pronounces his name. He's the one for National Geographic that did the Blue Zones book. He really, at the end of that book, sort of really encapsulates the whole idea and sort of really, you know, is the advice that I always give people. When you look at these blue zone pockets around the world and people that are living this lifestyle on a day in and day out basis that are really, you know, have gone plant-based and sort of, you know, make these habits that stick, you have to make it part of your grind. If you don't find feasible and easy and quickly accessible ways to get those plant-based options, it's just never going to work. So, you know, like, for instance, I'll give you an example from our own personal playbook. Every Monday morning, my wife will make either split pea or lentil soup. She alternates the soup that she makes every week. So one week we'll have lentil, the next week we make split pea. But she puts it in the crock pot, she sets it in the morning, and then it's ready for us for dinner. And then I use that lentil or split pea soup all week long for lunch when I go to work. So I'll mix it with some rice, I'll mix it with a potato, I'll bring it for lunch. So already my meals are preset for the week. I don't have to worry about taking a run to McDonald's or Burger King or Pizza Hut or going to the lunch buffet or anything like that, because we've already taken this step to sort of pre-plan those meals for the week, right? So that's just something that we've always done, and it's been a good step in our growth as a plant-based family, where you start building these healthy habits where you have to make those meals and those options accessible. If you don't start developing habits and developing a cultural shift in your house, it's never going to happen. And that's why, again, I always throw credit to my wife. If I were trying to fight this battle alone, and I was going at this myself with no support from my spouse, it would have been twice as hard to make this change. But because she was on board and she was all in and she was fully engaged and I had support from my family, that's what sort of made it a lot easier of a transition.
That's great. If you could go back in time and have a conversation with yourself before all this started, before that, fateful day at the doctor's office, and give yourself some advice, what would that be?
It really is just, I want to talk to men in our society. I want to get a hold of myself as a young man and say, hey, we got this all wrong. Because of the bodybuilding culture and because of the images that we see on magazines, we all think that we need to be swole and jacked and look like Arnold Schwarzenegger did back in his heyday, right? We all think that that's the image, like that's the archetype that we look at, where, okay, I got to look like that and I got to be big and jacked because then I'll be able to be this tough dude and women will want me, right? They've actually done studies where they show that women prefer a leaner man, right? When they show women those same images of guys and they ask women to pick out that archetype, women pick out guys that look like Cristiano Ronaldo, soccer players. Women pick out guys that are leaner, like lacrosse players, guys like that are sort of have a leaner, more athletic build. And so I talked to myself when I was a teenager and I was coming of age as a young man, and I say, hey, you don't have to be swole, dude. You don't have to look like Arnold. You don't have to have these big pipes and carry around all this extra weight. Leaner, fitter, stronger, that's the way to go, not necessarily bigger. And I think a lot of men in our society, if I can make a point on that end, that's where the trap comes in. Everybody thinks they have to be bigger, and they think that stronger and bigger are the same things, and it's not necessarily the case.
That's all great information. And then, if people are hearing your story and are resonating with this, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
I'm on Facebook. It's interesting. These kids that I coach, they've been after me to get on Instagram forever. So my company name is Rampage Strength and Conditioning. So I just got on Instagram. I don't get it, but these kids do it, man. And I always say, if you're not on the train, it's going to pass you by. So I'm on Instagram now. I'm on Facebook. After the Forced Over Knives article, it was amazing. I got this, tremendous sort of influx in my inbox from people all over the country, even some people all over the world, specifically from vegan and plant-based powerlifters that wanted to reach out to me and ask me for tips on some of the things that they're doing and how when I made the transition, how it worked out for me and everything like that. So I tried to get back to all those people on Facebook, and now some of these people have become my Facebook friends, when I'm talking to people that are in Bosnia, halfway across the world, and we're sharing tips on weightlifting and everything like that. So I always try to be available. And, I just much like you, man, I just want to inspire people and I just want to help the cause. And, I just want to sort of share my experiences as like a normal guy, right? As a dad and as a father and a husband and somebody who's busy. I like to sort of tell people, dude, I'm just like you. You and I are no different. I made the same mistakes you do. I still make mistakes, right? And it's how you deal with those mistakes and your resiliency on a day in, day out basis, week in, week out basis. That's what makes the difference.
Awesome. Well, Ben, thanks for the time, for sharing your story, and I'll look forward to catching up with you on Instagram, and keep doing what you're doing.
Awesome. Hey, thank you. It's been great, man.
All right. Take care.